So in today's class, we want to look at truth, tragedy and irony in the book of Job. So we're looking at 3 or 4 very interesting topics. First one, we're looking at the book of Job, what it tells us. But the second one, we're also going to be looking at irony, and we're continuing to look at questions of truth and tragedy from previous lessons. And we'll find that irony is one of the most fascinating aspects of literature that one can come across. Any thoughts on what irony is and why it's so powerful from the students of my class?
I don't really understand. Like, I understand irony in general, but I don't understand irony in
yeah.
And I read the chapter in
Yes.
And I
didn't get a long way with it.
But yeah, I understand how it is irony.
Yeah. 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 So this is the big question. What's the irony and how can it help us? Thoughts? Yeah. Yeah. So let's have a look then. Before we start, let's start with irony and what irony is about, because it's so powerful and it can make such a difference in our understanding of a book like the book of Job. So irony has to do with where you say something and it's quite different to what you would normally think to be meant by the term. And we're going to look at Soren Kierkegaard, and Soren Kierkegaard says that irony can be one of the most valuable things or lessons that you can learn in life. Soren Kierkegaard says, as a Christian, it can really help you understand the Old Testament and the Gospel and the New Testament when you understand what irony is about. So Kierkegaard says, most of us as children are taught to believe that if you do the right thing, you'll be blessed. And if you do the wrong thing, then it'll catch up to you and troubles will emerge when you do the wrong thing. However, as you get older into your teen years or into your 20s or 30s or 40s, you'll notice that life doesn't work out that way. Life is ironic. That is, the people who do the right thing, sometimes it falls apart. And so someone trains for the Olympics, puts in all the time, and then a week before they catch a bug or they break something and they can't go to the Olympics. But then as a result of not doing that, they buy a ticket and they win the lottery. So, so life is full of ironies where things don't exactly match up. Verbal ironies, where you say something but it means something different. Situational ironies, where you go into a situation that's different. Dramatic ironies. So the Oxford Dictionary defines irony as perception of an inconsistency. So life is not consistent. It doesn't follow simple everyday rules in history and in life. Good people get into trouble, and bad people, things sometimes work out well. And that's what the book of Job is going to discuss. Is it simply solved by God working it all out in the end, or is life much, much more complex? That's irony. For instance, some things that are intended for good, like Joseph's father in Genesis 37 to 50 buys him a colourful coat because he really loves Joseph. And he ends up getting thrown into a pit and goes through a lot of trouble because his father tried to do something that was good. And then he's thrown into a pit, so that's really bad. His brothers have treated him badly, but thrown into a pit, he eventually ends up in Egypt, ends up in control of a lot of things, and he blesses his brothers. And so good comes out of evil. Now, this is very important in pastoral care, that you can go to someone in a hospital and encourage them. They're in trouble, but God can bring good into their life. And it's important in education. Some kids will think, I've just got to do the right thing. I've got to get the right number of words in for my assignment. But the teacher says, hang on, it's more than just getting the right number of words in. Writing an assignment's an ironic thing. And so, for example, people may prosper, people may not do so well. So irony is the big literary device. And you'll find that when you read about literature, that a lot of people say that irony can be really useful in a novel or in literature. That is, if you have twists and turns, people get quite excited when they read a twist and a turn. And in a detective novel, that can be important. But any novel, it can be important where something is quite different to what you expect. So if you set up the right irony, it goes well. And if you want to become a comedian, then irony and comedy go very closely together. And in terms of character development, which we've discussed before, when the character does something anticipated, but it somehow makes sense, then that's ironic. And then it's really pleasing when we think, yeah, there's a sense behind that. In dramatic irony, so there's literary irony where the word's different to what we expect, dramatic irony where the audience has information than the characters. And so in the book of Job, Job doesn't know that God's up there discussing with angels and the devil what's going on in his life. And in the Greek tragedy, and so Romeo and Juliet, we've got we know more than is going on. So there's a drama going on in Romeo and Juliet, or Shakespeare's Othello. The audience is aware that Othello's best friend Iago is villainous and attempting to bring Othello down. So irony is often when things are going on that people aren't so aware of. So what are the major types of irony? Verbal irony, when you say something that's different. For instance, clear as mud. So students talking to teacher, teachers talking to student, student says, teacher, that's clear, that's clear. And whispers to the student next to them, clear as mud, clear as mud. So there's something about the word clear and mud that doesn't match. Or you go and meet someone and how did your meeting with that person go? They were friendly, friendly, it says to the person next to them. Friendly as a rattlesnake or a shark. You know? Or how did your first driving lessons go? Oh, it was fun, whispers the person next to them. Fun as root canal dental treatment. So there's an irony in the words. And Soren Kierkegaard says it's the mismatch that makes irony work. So yeah. What's the difference between sarcasm and irony? Yeah, I think sarcasm, it is, and it's a very negative branch of irony. So sarcasm is where it's negative and everything is just sad in the sarcasm. You know, like my students are brilliant. Oh, sorry, the teacher is brilliant. Yeah, teacher is a candle in pouring rain. You know, so sarcasm is negative, whereas irony is a more powerful truth that's not just negative. And so we find in the mismatch, there is truth, and then there's an opposite, and then there is a depth in the contrast that is there. And so Soren Kierkegaard says it's in the depth of the song, of the contrast, that you really find truth. For instance, in the journey of life, it begins with this great miracle of life, right? So life, it's a miracle. However, all the way along, there seem to be problems. And at the end of life, there is death. So life itself's ironic. And in the book of Job, he says, I'd rather die when I was born, save all this trouble. And so Job is playing with this ironic idea that better to die and never live. And life is much worse than you imagine. So it's ironic. However, life is much better than you imagine. So it's ironic. It's better, it's worse. Both are ironic, and they point to the complexity of life. So irony, according to Soren Kierkegaard, points to the complexity of life. That is, it's better and worse than you imagine. is what Soren Kierkegaard is saying. So when you learn that lesson, you are more mature. So don't expect to get better in your assignments or worse in your assignments. Your assignments will be ironic. Your best bits, the lecturer will probably skip over because he gets distracted. And the worst bits, the lecturer will probably notice for some strange reason. And assignment writing and marking, it's all ironic. Life is irony. And so telling a quiet group, don't everyone speak at once, is irony, because they're quiet, they're not speaking. Or coming home to a big mess and saying, great to be back, all this mess. Or your parents might say that. Or telling a rude customer, you have a nice day, I think really good thoughts to you. Or walking into an empty theatre and saying, it's crowded, isn't it? So this is all irony. A thunderstorm, beautiful weather we're having. And I was thinking about this beautiful weather we're having when it's pouring with rain. If you think more deeply about it, and some people say it's just irony, the beautiful weather tells me that I have an idea of what beautiful weather is: sunshine, a certain temperature, etc. However, there are people from Queensland moving to Tasmania because they've been brought up in this heat and they just love it when they freeze. I can't understand that. That's ironic to me. And so beautiful weather points to all sorts of deeper truths. And this is what Soren Kierkegaard is saying. Soren Kierkegaard actually wrote his master's thesis on Socrates. And Socrates had a couple of things that he tells us. One is that we should dialogue a lot more. Have you noticed the dialogue in the book of Job? There's lots of it. So book of Job is a bit like Socratic dialogue, but the other thing Socrates keeps doing is playing with irony. And he says, tell me more about your opinion. I'm very interested in that. You seem to know a lot. What he's really saying is, tell me more because I suspect you know nothing. And in your words, I'll be able to work out how little you know and prove it. And so Socrates is using irony. And so irony is quite important in education and in research and study. For instance, in science and research, what we want to know is a lot more about what we don't know. And so you come up with a thesis and a theory and you publish it. However, they then say we've now got to critique it and we've got to look for weaknesses in it. And so, why would you do that? I mean, we all know that a nice society is where you simply tell everyone they're wonderful and you don't critique things. And so there's an irony in the whole scholarly process that Socrates seeks to promote. And the Greek people got upset with it and asked him to take poison because he was annoying them too much. And in Jesus' time, Jesus' life, death and resurrection is ironic. That is, he comes and tells them truth. They don't want that. They just want to know that the outside of the tomb can be painted and look good. Jesus says that's not what life is about. And Soren Kierkegaard says irony is so good at telling you about what life is really about. And through irony, you can really live. So through irony, you can discover lots of study, graduating, get top marks, won't necessarily get you the good jobs. I saw a book the other day which said, don't go to uni, etc. So there's irony in all of that. But I did read the newspaper yesterday. It did say that the best way to get ahead in life is to go to uni. And so, so there's irony in all of these things. So someone's foolish, you say, you're a genius, meaning you don't know anything at all. Someone's delivering bad news. The good news is, I've got good news and bad news. Entering a child's messy room. Nice place you've got here. Or a seagull sitting on top of a no seagull sign. That's irony. And that makes you think. I mean, why would you put a sign up for seagulls saying no seagulls? I mean, seagulls don't read very well. And so there's irony. And irony, says Soren Kierkegaard or Socrates, makes you think more deeply because it deals with the reality of life being complex and often the reverse of what you think. So what you think is going to do well may in fact be the opposite. Irony reminds us of the importance of humility, that we know nothing. So that's one of the things that irony teaches us. And especially every time we think we know, we show we don't know. And so irony is all about not knowing. And so they're verbal irony, and you'll see lots of those in the book of Job. Then we've got situational irony. And so a fire station that burns down, that's an irony. Or a winner of a spelling bee failing a spelling test, or a T-shirt by America that is made in China, or a marriage counsellor who's divorced, or a Christmas card sent to a Jew, or leaving a car wash in the beginning of a downpour that makes the car muddy, or a dentist being... One of the ironies that I remember is that I was a chaplain in a school here in Brisbane, and they gave me an office in the library. And one day the librarian came in all sad and distraught first thing in the morning. And she said that she'd had to go out and return some of her children's books to the library out near the coast, etc. And she said, unfortunately, she had left the children's books on the dashboard of her car over the weekend, and they'd bent like this. And she said she had to return it to the library. And she said, and you don't know how tough librarians can be on you. And she was a librarian. So that was irony. There's a play on words there. And so irony is all about these things that are sort of half true, but they make you think deeper about things being a bit different. So going on a blind date with someone who's visually impaired, I mean, why do we laugh at that? A police station being burgled, purchasing a roll of stamps the day before the price to send a letter increases. So irony. And you might be able to think of lots of ironies. Here in Brisbane, we had a guy who did something wrong, and someone ran out after him, and he swam across the Brisbane River over South Bank. And what he didn't realise is that they had a police convention over at South Bank, and he came out the other side. There was about 1,000 police waiting for it. You know? That's right. That's right. Yeah. So the point is, and maybe that's one counselling solution, is learning to laugh at life. So when something goes wrong, then you learn to laugh at life and all the troubles it brings. There was a guy who, at a Hollywood movie studio, he was asked to go out and get some flowers. Each day he would show up with these flowers. And then the guy wondered, he noticed that the guy was taking them home, and he was quite annoyed. And so he followed the guy out, but he noticed he was going from the Hollywood studio across the road to a cemetery, and he was putting the flowers on the grave. And the guy came up and he said, I've misjudged you. I thought you were taking the flowers home, but I saw you took them across the road to the grave. And the fellow said, that's where I got them from in the first place. You come across that way. So again, there's a twist and twist, and it reminds us that we don't fully always know what is going on. And that's what the book of Job is about, that we don't always know what's going on. A staircase leading up at a fitness centre, so that people go up the staircase before they go to fitness. And you find fitness centres, people drive to the fitness centre rather than walk, don't they? And they do all of these things which seem to be contradictory to what it's about. Or Samuel Coleridge's Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner, which describes the irony of dying in thirst in the midst of water, water everywhere, not a drop to drink. And there's a cosmic irony. Notice the irony of fate, when all of the cosmic things going on around us at a large scale. So all of this works really well in literature. Any stories that you tell, any paintings that you do. Historical irony, a lot of things I mean, the wars are so often ironic. I mean, the Korean War, they just fought for a whole heap of time and they ended up drawing the line where it started in the first place. I mean, why do this? And wars are so often very ironic. So one of the key names to remember is Socrates and Socratic irony. And so the philosopher Socrates uses irony to remind us that we don't know everything. That is, we have less information that we need, and Socrates eventually is trying to show that we know hardly anything and we need to be a lot more humble. And so Socratic irony can be a term that is used. And the Bible is full of ironic situations as well. And so the Bible has a lot of irony in it. Now, one of the things that I really want to emphasize today is Soren Kierkegaard on the concept of irony, which was his master's thesis that you wrote, because as a Christian, it really speaks powerfully to the nature of irony and the nature of faith. So his master's thesis was called On the Concept of Irony with a Constant Reference to Socrates. So Kierkegaard did his master's on irony and Socrates, and then he applied it again and again in his life thinking. And he's one of the all-time great Danish thinkers from Denmark. So Kierkegaard sought to provide a similar service to Socrates by showing how often they got things wrong using irony, parody, satire, humour, and deconstructive techniques to challenge people. Now, Kierkegaard is at the time in history when individual subjectivity and individualism is emerging in the mid-1800s, and the role of irony really emerges together with the role of individualism in the mid-1800s. The Encyclopedia Britannica says that the term irony comes from the Greek comic character Iron, who's an underdog who's able to outwit the boastful character Alazon. And so the same thing's going on today. There's lots of other types of irony. There's romantic irony and other types of irony that we could look at there. Now, D.C. Merker says in Cicero's usage, in rhetoric, irony is often used in the ancient world, and Kierkegaard talks about irony being in the way we dialogue with one another. So irony, in fact, looks down or looks differently at the way things are. Irony can suggest that we're all in things together, just as humour can. And so that's why it often lightens. You go for a job interview and someone tells a joke, you relax because you think you're all in the same place. We're all laughing at the same things together. We're laughing with one another, not at one another. So irony can also be used in various ways. Humour and irony can build up a group. Unfortunately, humour and irony can also put down another group, and it can develop an in-group and an out-group, and it can victimise people. Irony can also hold audiences at bay. So great humour and irony can turn a situation around. Irony can be used to victimise an audience without addressing what's going on. So you can make a humorous, ironic statement. So the teacher can say, yeah, none of you have read anything, you know, etc. And there's an irony in that, and it may be true or whatever, but there's a humour too, in that everyone feels on the same place. Ironies can be useful in keeping people quiet so they can raise a truth, so it can keep the incompatible audience at bay. Irony can represent a false character, or it can show something about the true character. And so Jesus uses irony in these ways as well in the New Testament. So Old Testament and New Testament use irony in these ways. Kierkegaard in particular argues that irony is important for formation of your life. So to be a mature, thinking, thoughtful person is to recognize that things don't work out and to learn resilience and how to cope with the disappointments of life. And that's why in the book of Job, irony is seen as quite powerful. That is, Job does look to irony as part of the solution to the challenges that he faces. So irony is very useful there. In Mark chapter 4, verse 11 through to 14, we've got Jesus quoting Isaiah 6, where he says, seeing they may see and not perceive, hearing they may hear and not understand, lest they be converted and their sins should be forgiven. There's a lot of irony in that, isn't there? That is, Jesus says, look, I've got Pharisees coming to listen to me as well as the disciples. I've got a crowd here, and they're seeing, and they're not seeing anything. So seeing and not seeing. And these are the words of Isaiah in chapter 6. So Isaiah is using irony to describe what is going on. Hearing and not hearing, or not understanding. And Jesus says this is why he speaks in parables, because parables can use irony. So if your hand offends you, chop it off. And so there's irony in the parables that we read about there. So irony has lots of useful aspects and beneficial aspects that we can look at here. One of the books I just want to touch on when we come back to is Redemptive Reversal and the Ironic Overturning of Human Wisdom. Remember, the Apostle Paul says they confess themselves wise in Corinthians, but when they're foolish, they're wise. When they admit their foolishness, but when they say they're wise, then they're foolish. And G.K. Beale has written a book on this called Redemptive Reversals and Ironic Overturning, and he talks about two major types of irony. Firstly, there's the irony of people who do the wrong thing, think they can get away with it, but reality is they're going to get caught out by their own problems. I know one guy who, one person annoyed him and he was wheeling wheelbarrows full of bricks and such forth. So he decided during the break he'd get out and he'd saw partway through the ramp that was carrying the bricks up. And then he went and joined them all for a cup of tea. And then after the cup of tea, he forgot he'd done it. And he was the first person to wall up and it broke. And so irony, this retributive irony says, when you do the wrong thing, chances are you will get caught out. And it's a bit like road rage, isn't it? You know, someone annoys you and then you think, oh, well, I will give them a hand sign or something like that. But the irony is the person who could get most hurt out of this is you. And so one of the types of irony is that sin brings problems that you expect to escape from upon your own life. And that's mentioned a bit in the book of Job. That is, the three friends say, if you do the wrong thing, problems will come along. Well, the irony is that problems do often come along when you do the wrong things. So Beale, in his book, shows that God often allows people to have the consequences of their own sin. Think about Haman in the book of Esther. So in the book of Esther, Haman makes a gallows because he thinks he's going to hang Mordecai on it. And then he goes to see the king, but the king's had a dream where he realizes Mordecai is the great person, needs to be honored. And the king says to Haman, what should I do to a person? And he says, oh, you should do all these wonderful, wonderful things. But the irony is he doesn't know. And so that's a dramatic irony in that we in the audience know more than the actual characters in the story. So dramatic irony, literary irony, where the words are ironic, and also situational irony, because the situation there is ironic as well. So all through the Bible, we see irony. And the temptation is to dismiss these ironies as just being little light-hearted humours. But Soren Kierkegaard says, no, the ironies point to much deeper, more powerful truths in the life journey. That is a real ironic truth, is that you are going to get caught out when you do the wrong thing. And you think you can get away with it, but it will catch you out. And so I remember once I had a phone ring and I was driving along, and then I thought, do you answer it or do you pull over? And so I thought, oh, I'll pull over. So I pulled over, parked my car, and then talked on the phone. And then I thought I'd better drive off now, and then realised I pulled over in front of a police car. So a good thing I didn't answer it. They seemed to politely just allow me to drive on very happily and this sort of thing. But they were happy, I think, that I'd stopped and I'd talked on the phone and stopped. So there was an ironic one. Sins can catch one out. So that's part of the irony of life, is that sin is a lot more deadly than you imagine. And so Beale, in his book, applies this truth to a number of instances in the Bible. And if you are proud and self-focused, irony reminds you of the danger of that. God is doing a much bigger work, and don't become proud and self-focused. And then what Beale goes on to say, what you commit yourself to, you become, like the idols. And so in Psalm 115, we're told that if you make idols and worship idols, you become like them. But that's such a truth of life, isn't it? The irony is that you become like the things that you worship and follow. And so that will catch you out when you get caught up in those things. And then the second half of his book, Beale talks about the redemptive irony. That is, when you do things wrong and they might catch you out, in fact, God can be a lot more gracious and kind and restore you a lot more. And so you may be deserving of troubles in life, but God can turn it around. And that's particularly important. In Beale's book, he says there's an irony of salvation. There's an irony in the prodigal son. That is, the one who goes astray, spends all the money, is the one the father welcomes. That's ironic. Should be the other way around. See, God needs a lot more of our advice to tell him how we could run the world. And that's what's happening in the book of Job. That is, the three friends are saying, this is how you should run the world. And in the last 2 or 3 chapters of Job, chapter 40, 41, God says, Job, tell me, how would you run the world? 3 friends, how would you run the world? You've already told us that you'd have strict rules. You know, everyone would have to do this. They would have to write perfect essays with no mistakes in them. And they would have to get them in 6 months before they're due in. Yeah, that's that. And so if you ran the world the way people want to run the world, ironically, there wouldn't be much room in it. So the irony is that God has given us freedom and space and room, and good can flourish in difficult times. And in previous lessons, we've talked about this is possibly a best of all possible worlds that we live in. It's a complex world, and irony helps us to understand it. The powerless are often the people who do particularly well, says Beale in chapter 4 of his books. And so when you understand how powerless we are, then that can be useful. In chapter 5, faith in unseen realities. And so often it's when you see what is not seen, the invisible, that ironically it can be there, it can be true. And movies have been made about this. And then in eschatology, in the book of Revelation, which we'll look at in a few weeks' time, the eschatology of how things unfold is a bit ironic as well. We expect a lion to turn up to unroll the scrolls in the book of Revelation, and it's a slain lamb that comes along. So there's an irony in a slain lamb being the all-powerful leader of God's people rather than a huge lion. So irony is very useful for you if you want to write an award-winning novel or book, or do an artistic humanities creation of various sorts. Irony is also helpful to understand passages in the Bible, particularly the book of Job today. And irony is very, very useful to help you to understand life. That is, sometimes when you do the worst in school, that can be the biggest challenge and the best thing that happens to you. Sometimes when you do the best and think, I don't have to study anymore because I've mastered it, that can be the worst thing that can happen to you. So life is ironic, and ironically, this is not the end of our discussion of irony. there can be more opportunities ahead to think about irony as well. So let's stop at this point here, and we'll rejoin in the next few minutes. Let's take about a 5 or 6 minute break or so. Yep, maybe 7, 8 minutes, something like that. Thank you.